So we have to, in a way, compete with Donald Trump by tuning in to the language they're now hearing and speaking to them ourselves. And we've been not speaking to them. I think we've been talking about programs, and we've been deaf, I feel. So part of me wants to not pull all the moral onus on his supporters. I think it's up to us.
Welcome to Suffolk University's beautiful and historic modern theater. I'm Susan Spurlock, Executive Director of Ford Hall Forum at Suffolk University, and I'm delighted to welcome you to our program. Today we are joined by Arlie Russell Hochschild, one of the most influential sociologists of her generation, who's here to discuss her latest book, Stolen Pride: Loss, Shame, and the Rise of the Right. A little bit about the book. For all of the attempts to understand the state of American politics and the blue-red divide, we've ignored what economic and cultural loss can do to pride. What happens, Hochschild asks, when a proud people in a hard-hit region suffer the deep loss of pride and are confronted with a powerful political appeal that makes it feel stolen? Hochschild's research drew her to Pikeville, Kentucky, in the heart of Appalachia, within the whitest and second poorest congressional district in the nation, where the city was reeling, coal jobs had left, crushing poverty persisted, and a deadly drug crisis struck the region. Her brilliant exploration of the town's response to a white national march in 2017, a rehearsal for the deadly Unite the Right march that would soon take place in Charlottesville, Virginia, takes us deep inside a torn and suffering community. In Stolen Pride, Hochschild focuses on a group swept up in the shifting political landscape: blue-collar men in small churches, hillside hollers, roadside diners, trailer parks, and Narcotics Anonymous meetings. Hochschild introduces us to unforgettable people and offers an original lens through which to see them and the wider world. In Stolen Pride, she incisively explores our dangerous times, even as she also points to a way forward. It is now my pleasure to introduce Arlie Russell Hochschild. Arlie.
Wonderful. I feel extremely honored to be in a very, I think, almost sacred space where creativity comes together with moral concern. It isn't everywhere that is a safe place to have conversations and to throw out ideas. And it feels very precious to me, and I feel very honored now to be part of it. So you could hear me okay? Yeah? Okay. I know of two families. One family is here in the United States who said in 2016, if Donald Trump is elected president, I'm going to New Zealand. Okay. And the other family I know are Americans who lived in New Zealand, and they said, if Donald Trump is elected president, we're coming home to fight. So my conversation here and my book is in the spirit of the second, of leaning forward to engage the age we're in, not to say I'm too anxious to stand it, but to really find out what's going on and find real and good answers to real problems. So, Stolen Pride, I'd like to take you with me on an odyssey that I experienced going to eastern Kentucky, which is the Kentucky 5, Congressional District, Kentucky 5. It is the whitest and the second poorest congressional district in the country. And it used to be filled with FDR Democrats, and even Bill Clinton, they were Democrat. But gradually, the last two elections in 2016 and 2020, 80% of the residents of Congressional District Kentucky 5 voted for Donald Trump. So what brought me there was the question of how does this make sense? How does this feel right to people there? So there's a local story and a national story. Local story is one that Susan just alluded to. It's a place where it had been historically poor, but coal came in and was a source of enormous pride. We kept the lights on. We won World War I and World War II, and coal miners were like war heroes. They had suffered. They had black on their face. People were proud to have coal on their face. It indicated they had worked and really done work for the general good and providing amply for their family. And then it went away. And what went away? Jobs went away, opportunity went away. The value of what you know becomes devalued. It goes away. And your relative standing vis-a-vis others goes away. I asked a man that who, when I met him, was homeless and a recovering heroin addict after 12 years of addiction, high school educated white from Turkey Creek. Turns out to be an extraordinary, insightful man. He almost could see things better because he had been away from regular society in a Rip Van Winkle way, could kind of look at society with a special insight. And I asked him, how does loss turn into shame? Because it's occurring to me, and the whole purpose of the book is to help us become bilingual. We're used to speaking rational talk, and what we have to tune into is emotions, and especially shame and pride, that I think go to the heart of the appeal of Donald Trump. So let me say one more thing about the big picture before I take you to this young man and his explanation for how loss turns to shame. I think the macro picture that this echoes, the local story in this book echoes, is a magnified version of, is this, that from the 1980s on, we have to go back, mid-70s, 80s, a number of global events and economic events, what they call externalities, changed. There was offshoring. There was automation. There was the fluctuating value of resources like coal and oil. And those forces created prosperity disparities, especially between the middle class, people with BAs, and people without BAs. That's the new knife that cuts between the classes. and it cut between rural and urban, and it even cut between men and women. So these externalities are creating these prosperity disparities, which go with something else. There are exacerbating conditions, like 2008 was, a kind of a mini depression. That hit blue collar at rural people harder. It hit everybody, but it hit them harder. Same thing with COVID. It hurt everyone, but it hit blue collar harder. More deaths. And even climate change hit everyone, but it hits people that don't have insurance on their houses harder. We have inflation, but if the price of gas to get to your job and food goes up, it hits those with who are the poorest or second poorest congressional district in the country harder. So that is a set of exacerbating conditions that exaggerate anxiety, and a kind of create a predisposition to look for answers anxiously. That leads to another part of this macro story, which is I think many people have given up on the federal government and have turned away from what the sociologist Max Weber calls rational legal leadership, such as is offered by Joe Biden, who says, oh, don't look at me, look at these policies I've done, look at Build Back Better. I want you to judge me on that. That's kind of rational bureaucratic leadership is very different from that of a charismatic leader who says, I have all the golden information anybody needs. I don't need to look at books. I'm magically informed. My power is through you. And this elevates the importance of feelings, which we need to be bilingual enough to read, because there is a logic in those feelings. He isn't just ranting. So that is the macro picture that this book tells you a local contextual version of. Now let me take you to a young man who is helping me figure out the relationship between loss, which is part of this large story we're facing, and the constituency of Donald Trump. They're very drawn to him. Loss and shame, which in this book I find is kind of the secret. You might even say it's like coal itself. It's kind of an ore that someone prospects and develops and lights a flame. Shame. And here's what he says. Shame comes gradually. Let me give you an example of guys around where I live. First thing, a guy gets his layoff slip and he blames the inspector, then the supervisor, then he shakes his fist at the Obama administration for putting in the Clean Air Act, and he adds Biden and the Democratic Party. Then when his unemployment runs low and his wife asks for money for groceries for the kids, he faces a hard choice. If you need money and don't have a BA degree, you've got to leave. But his family's here and he doesn't want to leave. That's when he starts to feel bad about himself. He looks around at the jobs on offer for $9 an hour, and he turns his nose up what he thinks of as girly service jobs because he can't support his family on that kind of money. But then his partner says, we need to feed the kids. So he takes the crap job, and she says, there's still not enough money for food, gas, and fixing the roof, it's then that his shame begins to get stronger, because now he feels the problem is on him. And if he leaves on Route 21 looking for work, comes back empty-handed, that's shame waiting for him at home. Then if he gets into drugs, take it from me, he's ashamed. That can lead to divorce and separation from his kids, and now he's on the dole. He's always felt superior to others he saw on the dole, and now he's on it too. So he's ashamed about that, and mad that he's made to feel ashamed. Then he may read some op-ed in the Appalachian News Express calling people like him deadbeat for not supporting his family and paying taxes the town needs for sewer repair. He's not a contributor. On top of all that, he sees on the internet people outside the region firing insults at him as ignorant, racist, sexist, or homophobic. Now he's mad at the shamers. And by this point, he's forgotten about his own shame. He's just plain pissing mad. So what I came to believe is happening is that Donald Trump, charismatic leader, kind of an outsider, so to speak, from politics, has come. And I think he's a shamed guy, very harsh father, judged him, tore him down, sent him off to medical, and to military school. And that would be neither here nor there, just be a personal fact, except that I think it gave him an intuitive genius for spotting what I will call a structural shame for a whole sector of blue collar, which is materially sinking relative to a white BA middle class and relative to blacks with or without BAs. So there's a shame story that he's drilling into. And I believe, and this is kind of the last thing I'll do before we can open out, that Donald Trump is offering us, and has repeatedly over the years in different forms, a 4-moment anti-shame ritual. Moment 1, Donald Trump says something offensive, something provocative. All immigrants are poisoning the blood of America, or Haitian immigrants are eating our pet dogs and cats. Okay. That's moment 1, provocative statement. Moment 2, the punditry shames Donald Trump for its provocative statement. What do you mean immigrants poison the blood? We're an immigrant society. That's all of us, one way or another. You can't say that. Or what do you mean? It's a lie that Haitians are eating dogs and cats. You can't repeat a lie. So moment 2, punditry shames. Moment 3, Donald Trump becomes the victim of the shamers. Look what they're doing to me. Oh, it's so hard. They're criticizing me. They're ganging up. It's awfully hard to be ganged up on this, like this. Do you know how hard it is to be ganged up? Are they shaming you too? I'm taking the bullet for you. They really want to do to you what they're doing to me. So relate to me in my victimhood. Moment 4. Donald Trump rises up magically, and in time for the roar back, shame has been turned into blame, and roar back is at the nefarious, treasonous press, at the deep state, at blacks, at immigrants, at refugees, at well-paid public servants, the roar back. I believe that the Democratic part of America has been listening to moment 1 and moment 2. the transgressive statement and the shaming of Trump for that, and that the Republican side of America has been listening in to Donald Trump, the victim of the shaming, and the roar back at it. For them, I think that's cathartic. So I guess I've written this book so that we can tune in to the new language. I mean, what I hear around me is, oh, he's just ranting. You know, he's lost his marbles and there's no sense to it. He's not talking policies. And they're hoodwinked or uneducated, stupid. And I guess what I want us to do is not settle for such judgments, but to tune into the logic of the emotional appeal, realize that there's a setup for all of this so we can really be heard by them, can really hear them, and offer good answers to real problems. Let me stop there.
May I? Yes, please. Thanks for lending me your microphone, Arlie. First, my friends, I'd love to just acknowledge the honor it is to be in conversation with Arlie in this wonderfully important book. And I want to lift up what's so important about it. And the thing that's so powerful about your work is you bring us the voices of these men and women, their own language. You have the gift for inviting their expression, but you put their expression before us with such eloquence and simplicity that it's impossible for the usual assumptions of the big divide we're living with to stand up. To enter into your book is to enter into another kind of experience of America, which is itself very hopeful, because we experience one another as fellow human beings, all of us trapped in powerful currents, movements, mutations that we don't understand. I haven't felt together with my fellow Americans in quite this way in such a long time. But it's also a very painful book. And I'd have to ask you a kind of painful judgment. You have the gift, a profound gift of empathy. There's a phrase in the play we're in the context of the empathy wall. You cross the empathy wall. You, late in your book, bring us those who cross over, the bridge crossers, the people. You give us examples of people who cross over. You have crossed over. But how, when you have a figure like Donald Trump, with whom, frankly, you don't invite us to empathize with. No, you don't. You invite us to empathize with people who are drawn to him. And Donald Trump, you don't hesitate to imply, it's not the point of your book, you don't hesitate to imply what I would call a severe judgment about Donald Trump. It's required by the truth. How do you understand, in your empathy, the full moral weight of these lost souls turning uncritically, as far as one can see, uncritically to Donald Trump as the icon of their response to not being seen, not being listened to, the one who enables them to move from shame to blame, even at the risk of serious violence. I'd like to ask you to perhaps answer that in the context, tell the folks a bit about what brought you to Pikeville, anticipating that white nationalist demonstration that came with a great era of violence. But help us understand this. how should we think about the moral agency of the lost people who find their solution in Donald Trump? Are they morally responsible for enabling the power of Donald Trump and putting him on the threshold of world historic power?
I think, first, to answer your wonderful question, practically, we should think of this with a short term and a long term. In the short term, my practical advice is to go to the crossover states and get out the vote among non-voting Democrats and union people, such as my granddaughter is now doing in Phoenix, Arizona. So that would be, in other words, don't think about the heartland of MAGA, and that's in the short term, to give us, see if we could squeak through, that would give us enough time to begin a long-term effort to actually undo our own denial at what's been going on. And as I began my talk, you know, a good 42% of Americans are white without BAs, and they've been sinking, and these externalities have been hitting them, and then other things have hit them too, and they've turned to this guy. So we have to, in a way, compete with Donald Trump by tuning in to the language they're now hearing and speaking to them ourselves. And we've been not speaking to them. I think we've been talking about programs, and we've been deaf, I feel. So part of me wants to not pull all the moral onus on his supporters. I think it's up to us who've been tuned out. Did we know that there was a whole sector, this big prosperity divide? Some people were falling, and in fact were becoming susceptible to what have been called deaths of despair. In the region that I've looked at, a higher proportion of people live alone, they're in worse health, they're out of the labor force, and they are subject to deaths of despair. That would be suicide, alcohol, and drug addiction. And a number of the people I came to know, including this sage that I've discussed, have fallen into the social logic that goes with downward mobility. I don't think we've kind of known that they were there and that we had to build an empathy bridge to them. So that's on us, I feel, to do. And before we wag our moral finger too long, too hard, I think the job is to say, hey, this is a dangerous fascist, which isn't a word I use here, but everything around it. And he's not going to solve your problems. As indeed in his 4 years in office, he did nothing economically for his followers, 80% followers. He said, oh, I'm going to bring coal back. He did not bring coal back. I'm going to bring other great jobs in. He did not bring other great jobs. He did give them tax cuts, but that's not going to help the second poorest, congressional district in the country. So he did really nothing for them, but speak to them in a language they were tuned into. So I think empathy bridges are part of a larger strategy that we have to begin yesterday to understand the other side. I don't think it's all we need to do, but I think it's essential and preliminary to other steps. And for me, the most perhaps admirable leader out of chaos or potential chaos was Nelson Mandela. And he spoke Afrikaans. He even talked to his adversaries. There was murder going on. This was terribly violent, as we know, and it was going to be a bloodbath. But what did he do? He became strategically very organized. He led an underground movement, but there was diplomacy, there was empathy, and there was a deal. So I think he and Martin Luther King, there are other Gandhis who've won in intelligent ways. And speaking of empathy bridges, this book is not about me, the empathy bridgers, it's about discovering them as empathy bridgers. And these, as for listening and tuning in, it's not hard. I have no special treatments. Everybody could do what I do. I love what I do. It's collecting stories. It's incredibly amazing and makes me feel so given to. I feel I'm collecting pearls, but we need to put such empathy to use in together with other methods to get out of this mess.
You are a kind of connoisseur of empathy, I would say. And I think it's a virtue we need more now than ever. Help me understand a little further how we move from, if we follow your lead, we'll go from a kind of mystified antagonism to an more open-minded effort to empathize with the other. But the next step is what I'm concerned about. How do we move from having empathized with the other person with whom we disagree? Because what we disagree about is a matter of life and death. How do we move beyond empathy to a kind of creative political tension that may include fierce opposition, to be sure that we all avoid the kind of conflict that might lead to grievous, grievous suffering, even worse suffering. So move us a little further along that line that you're tracing, to go from empathy to judgment to a new kind of relationship. How do we get to that from the place where we are now?
Let me first say just something about how I would begin a conversation. Someone would say to me, oh, people, you're a professor from, Berkeley, California. Woo, Berkeley, California, whoa. And they'll say, well, people have a lot of stereotypes about us hillbillies. They think that we're dumb. And I'll say, well, people have a lot of stereotypes about Berkeley, California. Oh, so we both have stereotypes about it. So don't assume you know who I am. One guy said, well, people, we talk funny. People tell us we talk funny because we got a strong accent. And I said, well, my father grew up in Boston, California, and my name is Arlie, but he called me Arlie. And that I'm used to regional accents, And then this man I was talking to said, blessings on him. That's got us to a different tone, Okay, so that's for tone setting. And when I begin, I usually do what I would call a little status equilibration, I would make fun of my name. Funny name, you can't remember the Arlie, you can't remember the Hochschild, and it slides right by. And I will say, I met my husband ages ago, and I thought, what a kind, good man, but what a hell of a last name. And I'm a bad speller, which is true. So that was, it kind of gets the professor out of there and moves to an interaction. So how do we move from a kind of a liking to actually looking at the world in a similar way? Not easily done, but I think you do it by looking for common ground. And what I noticed while the guy who felt that God had sent us, Donald Trump, to lead us out of the desert, he was had been not a coal entrepreneur, but described himself as pro-coal. But now, his father had been a grave digger and then a school teacher and a preacher in Greasy Creek outside of Pikeville. And he showed me around. He said, "Have you ever been out to the hollers?" I said, "I'd love to go out to the hollers." So we're in the car and going out to these hollers, and we're looking at gravestones where his ancestors were. I had a phenomenal memory of how many greats back on which his mother's or father's side were buried where. I couldn't believe it. And so we're doing this. And then he looks at a house. He said, "Oh, see that house over there? Me and my business, I've tried to convince them to put solar panels on it." I thought, wow, okay. Over there, we're looking at a sawed-off mountain. There are 300 mountains, beautiful mountains, and a bulldozer just sawed off the top of it, calling this beautiful topsoil overburden. So anyway, the precious thing was called an overburden. Anyway, these are flattened mountains. I wouldn't have noticed them, but lots of people pointed them out. They experienced them as another kind of loss. And so my friend Roger Ford, the Trumper, is saying, "I'd like to see some solar panels up there, or wind turbines would be great." And I said to him, "My son is very interested in renewables. You and he should talk about how to get some turbines up there on those sawed-off mountains." That's an example.
It's a very good one, thank you. It's easy to, especially as you read the book, to imagine you in the room with these folks, kind of wonderfully letting them come alive through the stories they tell you. I'm aware that time suggests that we could open up the conversation to others in the room, and we have some colleagues who are with us online. So I'll depend on Susan to let us know if there's questions coming from the Zoom. But if there's anyone here, I can't quite see the audience very well. So if you'd like to address something to Arlie, please
Hi,
do so.
I saw you, I don't know, was it 6 or 8 years ago that you were here? You've identified a segment of our society that is on the edge of a bell-shaped curve. And I don't think you can explain Trump's appeal by going to that extreme section of our demographic. Roughly half the population is supporting him. And probably 25 or 30% of the people in Massachusetts will support him. Is it possible that and I think it's valid what you've said for that segment, but his appeal is much wider. And I just gravitate towards the idea that his appeal is that of an alpha male, and that human beings, like other species in the animal kingdom, are drawn to that sort of leadership. He promises safety, and obviously using fear to excite his audience. But I'm just wondering if you can address the wider appeal that Trump has, even to folks who are not economically depressed and socially depressed.
Well,
Here you are.
yeah. I think that the local story that I tell in the book for Kentucky, Congressional District Kentucky 5 does echo a story of a larger group of blue-collar white America. And as I say, some 42% fit in the simple two demographics of white and non-BA, don't have a ticket. That's people who have experienced downward mobility. That's a lot. And we can add to that people who are afraid that that's going to happen to them, that they too can fall down. And within that group, I think we can look especially at men. And I do believe that in the culture, and this includes middle-class men, working-class men, but also middle-class men, experience themselves as in a crisis. And there is something going on that I think we haven't explored fully. And in fact, don't we resist acknowledging. I have taught at the University of California, Berkeley, and the proportion of men among undergraduates has, in the time I have taught there, gone from 50 down to 43% of undergraduates who are male. What's going on? Something's going on that isn't the extreme, coal miner out of a job. This isn't a small group. These are, this is happening in the middle class. I think whoever is not at college is interested in what Donald Trump has to say.
Would you expand on that and bring in the two other elements that seem to be at play here? They're certainly reflected in your book, race and religion. How do race and religion play into the dynamic you're describing?
I would say race in the following way. May I read just a little bit? Do we have time for me to?
We have time, Arlie.
Okay. This is a guy who explains the race narrative. And when I first met him, he said, first things he said, "I'm trailer trash, okay?" So we got off to a little bit of a rocky start. And this is what he said as I'm driving him and his wife through the hollers, from moment to moment when he and his wife had romantic meetups before they got married in a movie house in a mall. So we're talking. This is the car talk. We think in narratives. Oh, this guy, by the way, he's disabled. His grew up very, very poor. Never been to college. We think in narratives. We got two main ones, and people like me don't fit either one. First, we've got the white middle-class narrative. You hear these success stories. A person comes from nothing and gets to something. So you say, congratulations, you're smart, hardworking, and really something. But if you look at the guy who says he came from nothing, you see he had something to start with. Then you have a second narrative for blacks, and people say, oh, you're a black person, that means you're poor. You didn't have something to begin with, and you don't have something now, and that's because you're a victim of racism. But that leaves a problem for people like me. I'm a Moore's Trailer Park white trash kind of person. The only narrative I have tells me that I'm white, so I'm privileged. And that's the something I have, and that must put me ahead. But what if it doesn't put me ahead? I'm not left with nothing because of racism. I'm left with nothing because I'm lazy and stupid. And then he goes on to say, actually, here's how he put it. I went to school, in high school, I had a friend, Bill, and he was adopted by a local family, but he really was born in Detroit. I don't see any difference between white trash and black trash. He's poor, I'm poor, he's poor. His family's messed up with drugs, my family's messed up with drugs. His family's on welfare, my family's on welfare. He cheats welfare, my family cheats welfare. He said the only difference I can see between them at all is the music. We've got twangy, tragic music, and they've got rap. And I then tried that out on other people I was talking to. And one guy said, "Oh, you haven't heard of hillbilly rap?" So it was as if even the musicians and the artists, people understood a connection, a social class connection, that they feel the left is totally, paradoxically, left out of the picture. I thought the Democratic Party was all about social class inequality. No, they don't see it at all. We've disappeared into identity politics. You know, women, gay, straight, trans, they don't see themselves. So that's how class comes up. They feel like a minority group. White men feel like a minority group. I know it sounds strange, but that's what they feel.
Other comments or questions from the audience?
I do think there was a look at the vote for Donald Trump in 16, and the conclusion was you can't blame Trump on the poor. The poor don't vote in the numbers that the middle class does, and it may be true again this time. And I don't want to, it's not the premise of your book so much as what you're calling shame. I was with today a group of white people, all of whom are fighting against their local police departments who have killed people in the town of Canton and Stoughton, and in my town of Boston. They were aggrieved against the police department, against the DA. They're demonstrating on Route 1. Across from them is a group of people demonstrating for Palestine. I walked from the police, what you call the anti-police demonstration, by white people, by middle-class white people, by middle-class Trump-voting white people, to the Palestine demonstration. My group said, they don't care about us. The ones demonstrating for Palestine, they won't care about us. Well, not true. I went over and they were open people. I care about Palestine. But it's hard to conclude, it happened so recently, but the issues of injustice being done to any group, I'm a small town white person who's a tradesman. It is not simple. It's complicated. And it's about vengeance, power, strength, to fight back against whatever power you feel is unjustly treating you and people like you. And for white people who vote for Trump being anti-police is against every one of our sort of received wisdoms. He's for the police. Well, he is for the police. But I'm just saying it's very complicated, and I don't think the poor are to blame for Trump.
Good, I agree with you. Yeah. And I also agree that they don't vote, and so pragmatically, if we want to squeeze through this election, we should focus on crossover groups and getting vote out among young women. I mean, just pragmatically as a first step of winning this election, so it gives us some breathing room to get real conversation going about these issues.
Hi, Arlie. I wanted to pick up on something you said a little bit earlier when you were responding with a short-term solution and a long-term solution. This book is available to us now, and your earlier book, Strangers in Their Own Land, where it was available in 2016. The work that you do is long-term work, to sit with people and to know people, and then to be able to relate their stories in writing. That takes time. And yet you also clearly have an urgent message. And I wondered if you might say something about how the depth of wisdom that you're reaching for and the urgency come together in the work that you do. How do you deal with that and make decisions around that?
Great. This may be time to do another little, perhaps closing reading that Susan wanted me to do. Yes, I think I share a feeling in this room of great urgency, and yet the topic is complex and inherently long-term. And I think we simply need two avenues in our brain. One of what can we do now to give us, to get through this election, to win it, and give us breathing room for the long term. And in the long term, so that's what I think, how they go together, and why I love what our granddaughter is doing. Got 12 people to vote today in 110-degree heat in Phoenix, Arizona. That's where the action is now. It's not here, it is there. But what she's doing is helping us get time for this kind of long-term work. And in a way, it's a very humble message that I think we need. And I'm going back to my first message about the two couples, the Americans in America and the Americans in New Zealand. We need to be coming back for the fight. And I was very moved by a story of a man who became alcoholic. His parents had been alcoholic. It was almost a two-generation downward mobility story. His father lost a job in guarding a coal mine, and then worked in a lumber yard, but he lost that job, and then he worked a very low-wage job for the city, clearing the streets, and then he got ill. The father fell into drink, and this boy had a terrible childhood, his both parents quarreling with each other and so on. And then he became alcoholic. And he became one of these victims of diseases of despair. He told me, I no longer wanted to live. My marriage had broken up, and my brother committed suicide. My other brother was living with me and eating food out of my refrigerator. My wife didn't take care of the children, the child. Anyway, he had a desperation. And he told me I didn't want to live. But he went to a therapist who got him into detox. And he said this. When Tommy entered the recovery center, he sat before a kindly intake clerk who asked him questions about his life. She asked me if my parents drank and were they alcoholics. I told her both were, and she told me, "This isn't your fault." I cried. On the third day, he walked outside and seated himself on a patio chair, miserable. He said, "My head was hung low, and I was staring at the ground between my legs. Then I suddenly noticed a trail of ants. Each ant was carrying a small load, a crumb, a bit of leaf, a piece of dirt. Then I saw it. One ant was carrying another ant, as big as he was. That dead ant was useless, not doing its part, being a load instead of carrying a load. I thought, see that dead ant? That's me right there. I could be like that carrier ant. I do not want to be the dead carried ant. That was one of the greatest moments in my life. That carrier ant brought me back." And now he is a therapist in a recovery clinic helping other dead ants. I think there's a lesson for us in this, which is that many of us have been avoidant. I do feel for 2 decades I myself have been asleep to the dilemma of the people who are now the problem. And that we have a job ahead of us. And people keep saying, well, those people should come to us. Do people ever ask you about you? You know, why is it you always going to them? Because I think the deal is we should be the carrier ant. That's what I would say. Thank you for the question.
Other comments or questions, folks?
I think we have time for one more question. Okay, we have one up here.
With the fact that white men are falling in our culture, and it's been shown in a number of instances, and people like Biden are focused on DEI, which in its views exclude white men, I think is feeding the resentment felt by the population you're looking at. Could you comment on that? Or?
So the question was?
The question is when Biden says that my criteria for appointing somebody is race and sex, and in this country, the people who aren't that race and sex, that can feed resentment, especially when the demographic of white men is falling behind in education, income, and in the class structure that you're looking at.
I actually, at Berkeley, I was, part of a Senate committee on affirmative action and went around to different departments. Could African Americans be considered and so on? I now think that there's a better way to do it, which is which is to go to African American schools. These could be poorer schools and levels of achievement can be lower, but to get kind of the best students in those schools, the schools they had available to them. So it is entirely by merit, but it's done a different way that gives a chance to blacks. So I think, maybe I'm not quite answering your question, but I think there's a way to, as Harris says, not go back. That isn't picking people out because of their color.
Susan, if I may just
I was
draw-
actually going to give you the floor, Jim, for a moment.
Well,
So you have
I
the
just
floor.
wanted to fully appreciate what Arlie has done in this book and in our conversation this evening, and lift up again the extremely painful and I would say dangerous context that is represented in this moment. Appreciating again Wes Savick and the theater department of Suffolk University for making this moment powerful, both by the play that's being mounted here, but also by offering this context for this important book. I want to close by lifting up what to me is an example of the gift that Arlie offers here, because it's a good example of the fresh insight that we need. She draws attention to the fact that Donald Trump's motif, you could say his theme, a phrase that Arlie uses a number of times in the book, his master narrative is the stolen election. How is it that he returns again and again and again to the complaint about the stolen election? And why does that seem to work, gathering such power to him? I'll close by just reading a paragraph from Arlie's book that sheds real insight on that question. Through his daily rhetoric of victimhood, Trump guided the emotional needle from loss to stolen. Over time, it grew into a master narrative, and like a magnet, it gathered further losses to the idea of stolen. The losses of all the people that Arlie brings to us in this book. Election, stolen. Appalachian land, stolen. Proud region, stolen. Good jobs, stolen. Community, stolen. Story of heroic America, stolen. An undisputed concept of human sexuality, stolen. Honorable country culture, stolen. White power, stolen. Recognition of one's struggles and accomplishments, stolen. Visibility itself, stolen. Right to guns, watch out, or it'll be stolen. Pride, stolen. Stolen became a master narrative, and those who are stolen from are victims. All of the losses in that litany are based on real human experience, except one. The first one, the election, stolen. That's a lie. All these other losses are truths. But Trump's master narrative is based on a lie. And the power of the losses that are reckoned with in this book is suggested in the fact that these victims of all these losses, in the end, now, alas, are victims of Trump's lie. And because of that power, so might we all be in 10 days. And the only thing to do with an experience like that is to try to understand it, to dare to think about it, and look below the surface of received wisdom. And Arlie, that's what your book does with such power. Thank you so much for it.
Arlie, would you like the final word? You have the final word.
Thank you so much. That's a very beautiful thing to say. And again, I just want to affirm the importance of the space that Wes and Susan and all of you have made here for us to be kind of the carrier and carrying forward a work that is going to be needed way past the election, whichever way it goes. So let's move the work forward.
Thank you very much. And to our audience, thank you very much for being a part of the conversation, both those in this beautiful theater and those who joined us on Zoom. Have a good evening.